So once upon a time, there was a woman who lived kind of way out away from civilization. She lived in a little house kind of near the edge of the forest. And she would go out every day and she'd go digging in her garden, get whatever little stuff she could get and make a little stew. Sometimes she'd go out in the woods and she'd dig for a little bit of herbs, a little bit of this, a little tuber here and there, whatever she could find. And so she was out one day digging and digging and digging and looking around. As she kind of looked around through the old bits of leaves around an old oak tree, she saw something kind of half sticking up out of the ground. She thought, oh, it looks so promising. And so she kind of went a little closer and kind of poked and dug around in the dirt around, and it was a big old hairy toe, just kind of half sticking up out of the ground, you know. She could just kind of see the old sort of jagged toenails sort of sticking up and the little tufts of hair. And she kind of looked at it, and it had clearly been in the ground for a while, but you know, there was still some meat left on that toe. So she thought, okay, yeah. You know, she'd been kind of been an unwilling vegetarian for quite a while. She hadn't had fresh meat in a while, so she thought, ooh, this will be really good to add a little something to my nightly stew. So she kind of dug and dug and dug around there, and she kind of pulled that thing up. It was a big old hairy toe. You know, it was kind of a little gray. I mean, the color wasn't so great, but you know, there was definitely some meat on that bone. So she put that in her basket and she went on home, and that night she kind of chopped up a little turnip and threw it in the pot. You know, she chopped a little bit of carrots and a little bit of parsley, and plunk, there was that toe just kind of boiling and bobbing around there, and you know, she just stirred and stirred. It actually started to smell pretty good. So after a while, she poured herself out a nice big bowl of toe stew. And she kind of ate and ate. You know, the carrots were nice and soft, and the turnips had that little bit of sweetness. And, you know, finally she got to that toe that was kind of there in the midst of it all. And she kind of slurped away. And she got a lot of meat off of that bone. Every once in a while she'd have to pull out a little hair and get rid of that. And, you know, the toenail was pretty sharp, and she got rid of that one too. She thought she'd save it and maybe make, you know, a broth out of it the day after, because she was thrifty. So she ate that whole thing and she went to bed with a warm, full belly. That had been the best meal she'd had in a while. She went to bed and she fell asleep. Well, later on that night, a cloud came up and covered the face of the moon, and a wind began to rise, and the trees at the edge of the woods began to kind of writhe and move, and this sound kind of started coming out of the woods, and it wasn't quite enough to wake her, but it was enough to kind of make her shift and turn where she lay in her bed, and it sounded kind of like a great voice calling, "Where's my hairy toe? Who's got my hairy toe?" Well, you know, she didn't really totally wake up. She just kind of shifted over and pulled the covers up a little closer over her chin and kind of settled back into a deeper sleep. But that wind kind of kept going, and the cloud over the moon just got thicker and darker, and a little while later, that voice kind of came again, and this time it was pretty distinctive. You know, you could really hear that, and it was closer. It had come out, it seemed, from the woods, and it sounded kind of like, "Where's my hairy toe? Who's got my hairy toe?" Well, this time the woman woke up. She was not sleeping anymore. So, she was pretty nervous, and she thought, "Oh, I better go downstairs and bar the door." She didn't know what was out there, but she didn't want it coming inside. So she went down the stairs and she took the big bar and she put it over in front of the door, and she thought, okay, that's pretty good. She felt better about that. She was still pretty tired, you know. So she went back upstairs and she went back in bed, and she fell back asleep again, and her belly was still really full from that toe stew, you know. So not half an hour later, she hears this against her door, and she hears, "Where's my hairy toe? Who has got my hairy toe?" She's pretty scared now, but she's just paralyzed with fear, and she hears as the door comes crashing down, and she hears these footsteps. and they're coming up the stairs and over to her door. The door goes whack, and into her room comes this great big shaggy figure, hair all over, long greasy nails dripping with something really nasty that's not going to come out of the carpet easily, hair all over, the little eyes kind of yellowy green, and out of that nasty mouth she hears, "Where's my hairy toe? Who's got my hairy toe?" And this thing comes closer to the foot of her bed. And she sits there going, and out of her mouth, and she didn't even know how it came out, but it just came out. She went, "I ate your hairy toe!" And that figure comes over and stops. Those green eyes kind of stare into hers. And she hears this voice go, "Oh, you're kidding me! You can't be serious! You ate it? Oh man, do you have any idea the kind of athlete split I suffered from for years? Oh, that is just that just turns my stomach." He turns around, this shambling thing, and out he goes out of her room, down clumping to the stairs and out the door and boom into the woods. And well, she's shaking and shaking, she can't believe it. Somehow she ends up falling asleep near dawn. And she wakes up and to a beautiful morning the next day, and she thinks, was it a dream? Was it real? Did it happen? It can't have been. Ooh, that toe, maybe it gave me a bad dream, you know? Sometimes when you eat something overly rich. Well, she went downstairs and she was looking around in the garden, and just around the time when she thought, you know, this really didn't happen, this was all my imagination, she caught sight of something out of the corner of her eye. She looked down, and over by the edge, by the garden path, there was a set of footsteps in the dirt, kind of heading off towards the woods. And the thing she noticed about these great big footsteps is that on the left side, there was a toe missing.